She'll be speaking on two very important topics. Specifically, she will maybe a very short discussion on one of them titled The Role of Football Agents in Promoting Safeguarding in Football. The role of football agents in promoting safeguarding in football. Then also, she will also make a presentation on the governance and integrity in football, lessons for the African football ecosystem. So if your hands are not too busy, I just want you to join your hands together as we welcome Karina No to the podium for her presentation.
Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. And of course, it's a genuine privilege to be here with you today at the AFAC 26, Day 2, among professionals who occupy one of the most influential spaces within the football ecosystem. And we often speak about football in terms of opportunity, growth, commercial value, and global expansion, and rightly so. But football continues to create pathways that transform lives across Africa and beyond. But today, I want us to pause for a moment and look beyond the business side of the game, beyond contracts, beyond transfers, and beyond commissions. And because every deal is a person, and very often the person is young, ambitious, and entering a system that they do not fully understand. And that is where today's conversation begins. They have the wrong slide. Yeah, the safeguarding one, the second one. Sorry, so as been mentioned, I'm doing two presentations in one go. So I'll do this next after. So I'll just maybe with them to put that up. But maybe just to begin, the question may sound simple, but in reality sits at the center of one of the most important responsibilities in modern football, because in this industry, we're very comfortable discussing negotiations and contracts, commissions, and commercial opportunities, as I said earlier, but we do not spend enough time discussing protection. And behind every transfer is a human being whose life can be profoundly shaped, positively or negatively, by the decisions made around them. And the reality is that many players enter football systems long before they fully understand how those systems actually work. And so the issue is not only about creating opportunity, but the issue is about ensuring that opportunity does not become a vulnerability. So let me bring this into human terms. Imagine a 16-year-old from West Africa. He is talented, his family believes football could transform their future, and intermediary approaches them, or also known as agents, with promises of a European opportunity. And the family sacrifices financially to support that move. Sometimes they sell the land, sometimes they borrow money, and everyone believes this is the beginning of success. The player arrives abroad, but there's no contract, and no club waiting, no support structure, and no protection, and suddenly what began as a dream becomes a crisis. This is not fiction, and there have been multiple documented cases across Africa where young players were abandoned after false promises of trials and contracts abroad. Some become homeless, some lost legal immigration status, some never returned home, and this is why safeguarding matters. Because behind every transfer is not simply a transaction, it's a human life. So you can skip to slide 4. Yeah. So let's look at the dual reality where football without protection becomes vulnerability. And here we talk about football creates extraordinary opportunity, and across Africa, football has become one of the greatest vehicles for social mobility. It creates hope, income, exposure, and possibility for millions of young people. But the same pathways that create opportunity can also create risk. Yeah. And because when ambitions meets lack of information, vulnerability increases. And when vulnerability meets weak oversight, exploitation becomes possible. And this is where dual reality of football, the game can elevate people, but weak systems can expose them. And if we're serious about building a stronger football ecosystem, then protection must evolve alongside opportunity. So let's look at the global risk, and here we're going to talk about trafficking disguised as opportunity. And this is not an African issue. Globally, football trafficking, and I think one presenter did this yesterday in the evening, where football trafficking and player exploitation is now recognized as a safeguarding concern by organizations such as FIFA and Interpol. And there have been documented cases in countries such as Belgium and Portugal where young players from Africa and South America were brought into Europe under promises of professional opportunities. Instead, they found themselves isolated, unsupported, and financially exploited. And some have their passports withheld. Some were left stranded without contracts or salaries. Some became dependent on the very people exploiting them. So this conversation is not theoretical. It is a documented global reality within football, and it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth where opportunity without regulation and accountability can become a pathway for exploitation. And maybe just to, again, give another example of an abuse case where people knew, but nobody acted. So one of the most painful lessons football has learned globally came through abuse scandals exposed in England by survivors under Andy Woodward. Young academy players were abused over many years by individuals in positions of trust. But perhaps the most disturbing part of those cases were not only the abuse itself, it was the silence surrounding it. People noticed warning signs. People suspected something was wrong, but nobody acted. And that silence allowed harm to continue for years. And that is why safeguarding is not simply about policy documents or regulations, it is about the culture within organizations. And it is about whether people inside the system are willing to take responsibility when something feels wrong, because silence protects systems, but it does not protect players. So let's look at the role of agents when it comes to the safeguarding aspect in football and in sports generally. So every transfer decision can increase risk or increase protection. So where do agents stand in all of this? Agents are often described as intermediaries or negotiators, but that definition is far too small for the level of influence agents actually hold within football, because every transfer decision has consequences beyond the contract itself. So when you advise a player to move to a club, you're not only negotiating financial terms, you're influencing the environment they live in. So the systems they will depend on, the risk they may be exposed to. So every transfer decision can either increase that risk or increase protection. And that makes safeguarding part of the decision-making process itself. When you look at the power dynamics now, and players trust your guidance before they understand the system. And many young players trust agents before they fully understand football system themselves. They trust, that trust creates that influence that agents have over players in the system generally. But influence also creates responsibility, because guidance shapes decisions that can alter careers, well-being, and futures. And you influence which opportunities players see. You shape how they understand that risk. And in many cases, your advice determines whether a player enters a safe environment or a dangerous one. So that is not simply influence, that is your responsibility. When you look at gatekeepers of player safety, so we need to redefine that professionalism means within football agency work. So professionalism is not about closing deals. Professionalism is also about protecting people. Agents are not simply intermediaries. Agents are gatekeepers of player safety. And safeguarding must become part of the professional identity, not just a compliance exercise, because true professionalism is measured not only by the financial success, but by the standards we uphold while pursuing it. So when we look at a successful deal, can also still mean an unsafe environment. So a transfer can look successful publicly while still being deeply unsafe privately. A player may sign a financial attractive contract, but arrive in an environment where salaries are delayed, accommodation is poor, welfare systems are weak, and support structures are non-existent. So from the outside, the deal appears successful, but from the player's perspective, the reality can be very different. And this is why duty of care matters, because success without protection is incomplete. So no guardianship, no welfare structure, and high-risk transfer. So this becomes even more critical when dealing with minors. FIFA regulations around minors are intentionally strict when young players are the most vulnerable participants within football. Yet we see informal arrangements, undocumented movements, and situations where young players are transferred without proper guardianship, education planning, or welfare oversight. And that, again, is not opportunity, that is risk. And safeguarding begins when someone within the system decides that certain lines should not be crossed regardless of financial opportunity. So let's look at the daily decisions an agent can make between when it comes to safeguarding. So as we've already established, safeguarding is not abstract. It exists in everyday decisions. It exists whether whether proper due diligence is conducted before placing a player. It exists in whether difficult questions are asked about living conditions, welfare support, and financial stability. It exists in whether players and families are educated honestly about risk rather than sold unrealistic expectation. So again, I reiterate this, safeguarding is not theory, it's practice. So let's look at the principles and responsibilities agents can have when it comes to safeguarding. Due diligence means knowing the club, understanding the conditions, and recognizing the risk before a contract is signed. And what do you mean by ownership is that means understanding that if something goes wrong, the player would most likely call you first and not FIFA. And by protecting minors, it means recognizing that vulnerability increases with age and dependency, and therefore shortcuts cannot exist. So educating families means helping them understand realistic realities, risk, and probabilities instead of simply selling dreams. And recognizing warning signs early means understanding that small indicators can often point towards much larger safeguarding concerns. And these responsibilities are not separate from football business, they are part of the ethical football business. Sorry. Yeah. So let's look at red flags that exist most of the time in safeguarding, and this is isolation, fear, and silence. Sometimes safeguarding concerns appear subtly before they become serious. So we see cases of isolation, fear being used to coerce players, control over documents or finances, withdrawal, silence, and these are not small concerns, these are warning signs, and recognizing those signs early can completely change outcomes for players. And you're not expected to prove abuse, you're expected to act. So one of the most important things safeguarding requires in action, not certainty, it's just simply action. You're not expected to investigate or prove the abuse, but you're expected to respond when concerns arise. So there have been cases across football where individuals stay silent because they fear damaging relationships or disrupting opportunities, but silence has consequences, and choosing not to act is also a decision. So silence versus action. Silence protects the system, action protects the players. And in almost every safeguarding scandal in football, the pattern is the same. Warning signs existed, people noticed concerns, but reporting came too late. And this is why courage matters within safeguarding, because action protects players and good safeguarding is proactive. And it involves due diligence, transparent communication, welfare planning, and being willing to walk away from unsafe opportunities. So, as I said earlier, not every deal is a good deal. Sometimes safeguarding comes down to difficult ethical decisions. And if one opportunity offers greater financial return but carries significant welfare concerns, while another offers stability and long-term development, which one would you choose? Because that choice defines your standard, and reputation is not built only on successful deals, it is built on ethical decisions. So when you talk about cultural shift and from transaction to trust, if African football is to grow, and it will grow, safeguarding must grow alongside it. We cannot build a modern football ecosystem on weak protection systems. We need a cultural shift from transaction to trust, from silence to accountability, from exploitation to protection, and because innovation without protection creates risk, and success without ethics is ultimately unsustainable. So my final message to you is that safeguarding is responsibility, Safeguarding is not simply compliance. It is not avoiding sanctions. It is not about it is about protecting human beings and recognizing that every decision we make can have long-term consequences for another person's life. So maybe just in terms of closing, what standard will you stand for? And so I will leave you with this final thought. The question is not what deal you can close. The real question is what standard will you stand for? And thank you. And maybe just to sort of use a different direction, instead of you asking me questions, I would like to open this conversation to the room, because safeguarding only works when responsibility becomes collective. So maybe from your experience, maybe one or two of you can jump in. What are the biggest safeguarding risks facing African football today? What do agents need to take more responsibility, and what practical steps can immediately improve player protection within our ecosystem? Happy to repeat the questions, but I would just like to hear your thoughts on some of the experiences you've had in your career, in your work, your day-to-day lives.
Thank you, No, for this wonderful presentation. Yeah, in my own personal experience, I could remember in 2017, 2018, an individual, unregistered agent then, brought 10 Nigerians to this Cape Verde by road. He promised them football trial. They will move from Cape Verde to Brazil, being a Portuguese-speaking country. I collected then about $2,000 each from each of the players. They are 10. So after 2 weeks in Cape Verde, he left them. And they all spent 2 years here. So one of them reached out to me then in 2018, and we worked on the repatriation. We brought them back to Nigeria. So safeguarding in football is not a matter of one person or agent, club owner, or it's a collective effort of everyone. That's why I wonder why FIFA is giving the safeguarding cost to only agent alone. I think safeguarding cost should go through to all stakeholders of football, not only agents.
I think they do have a course that's open actually to everyone, if I'm not wrong. FIFA guidance.
Sure. Every year you must pass through safeguarding course as an agent. So we are happy to do it year in, year out. We are happy to do it. And now we are paid to CAF also to start monitoring the exporting of young players from Africa. There should be a tracker, I think, don't let me use tracker. There should be, it's a time of technology, so there should be one IT or technology that we should exhibit or we should put into players moving out of Africa. I think we can achieve it if it's a collective effort. You should be able to do it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good morning, everyone. Allow me to explain myself in French. Je vais commencer déjà par une petite doléance et en me présentant bien évidemment. Je suis Manuela Victoire-Itok, je suis directrice exécutive d'une agence de football basée au Cameroun. Je suis donc ici en représentation de mon patron, lui qui est agent FIFA. Je suis sûre et je pense d'ailleurs qu'il y en a beaucoup là qui me regardent sans toutefois comprendre ce que je dis, parce que depuis hier, nous sommes face à un gros problème, celui de la communication. J'arrive à comprendre l'anglais, mais pas parfaitement. J'aimerais que pendant ce séminaire, que je puisse comprendre tout ce qui est dit. Et ce n'est pas le cas, parce que nous avons des traducteurs qui ne donnent pas. C'est-à-dire, on arrive à traduire l'anglais parfaitement, le portugais parfaitement, mais pas le français. Et ça, c'est un problème. Donc, s'il vous plaît, si vous pouvez pallier à cette situation, de nous permettre de comprendre parfaitement tout ce qui est dit, ça sera très, très favorable pour nous. Maintenant, pour revenir sur la présentation de Madame Nour, très, très belle présentation, mais c'était très rapide. Il y a des points sur lesquels j'aurais aimé qu'on insiste, notamment sur les red flags. J'ai d'ailleurs sorti mon téléphone pour prendre une image. Elle est passée rapidement, donc j'ai pas eu le temps de rapidement m'imprégner de la situation. Alors j'aimerais, s'il vous plaît, qu'on puisse, dans une certaine mesure, essayer de revenir sur certains points qui ont été débités assez rapidement. Merci beaucoup.
Sorry, I think both of us are in the same boat. I think she was actually talking about some of the red flags to look at for relating to safeguarding. Yeah. And okay, she will help us. Good. You have a question?
I just wanted to know if Nora has understanding everything.
No, she doesn't.
Personne de l'organisation. C'est ça en fait.
You have a question?
Yeah.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je reviens sur le problème de la communication que tout le monde a soulevé parce qu'on s'est déplacé aujourd'hui pour venir s'enquérir des innovations qu'on est en train de dire. Il faut savoir que c'est un événement FIFA et la FIFA a 3 langues officielles, à savoir le français, l'anglais et l'espagnol. Donc toute organisation doit prendre en compte ces paramètres-là. Parce que tous les francophones qui sont là n'ont aucune information par rapport à ce qui se dit en anglais depuis hier. Et ça, c'est vraiment dommage. On s'est déplacé d'un pays à un autre et ne pas avoir d'informations. Bon, c'est vraiment désolant. Et puis là, il faudrait qu'on cherche à remédier à cette situation-là. Je vous remercie.
No, I hope you got those questions. I don't know if they are directed at me. But
No, I think the lady was just passing a comment that she also did not understand a word of my presentation because it was in English and there's no translation to French.
We actually made an arrangement for translation from English to French and also to Portuguese. I really don't. Okay, it's fixed now. It's okay now. Sorry, we just have to continue. Maybe you go to the next. It's working now. Okay. For French or Portuguese? Both of them. Okay. I think you can go ahead with the next. Thank you.
So on to my second and last presentation. I hope that, I promise you this is the last one. On governance and integrity in football and the lessons from the African football ecosystem. Yeah. So good morning once again, distinguished guests, respected agents, federation officials, and colleagues. Again, it's a genuine privilege to be here with you at AFAC 26, among professionals who are not only shaping careers, but shaping the future of African football itself. So we normally speak about African football. We often speak about talent, And rightly so, Africa continues to produce some of the most gifted footballers in the world across Europe, Asia, the Middle East. Global competitions, African players continue to demonstrate excellence at the very highest level. But today I want us to move beyond the conversation about talent alone, because talent by itself is not enough to build a sustainable football ecosystem. And this conversation is really about something deeper. We're talking about systems, we're talking about trust, we're talking about governance, and ultimately it's about who acquires the value generated by African football. I'm just going to pause a bit. Yeah. You okay? So why does Africa produce world-class players but not world-class football systems? So let me begin with a question that should make us all uncomfortable. Why does Africa consistently produce world-class players, yet we struggle to produce world-class football systems? Because the issue has never been talent, the issue is structure. And we see African players excelling in elite leagues across the world. We see African footballs winning champions leagues, domestic titles, and even individual awards. But when we look inward at many of our domestic ecosystems, we often see fragmentation, inconsistency, instability, and weak institutional structures. So we produce talent for the global football economy, but we have not yet built systems strong enough to maximize the value of that talent within the Africa itself. And that is one of the defining governing challenges facing African football today. And we look at the African paradox, which is talent export powerhouse and the weak systems. And Africa is unquestionably one of the richest football talent ecosystems in the world. Our academies, communities, and grassroots structures continue to produce exceptional players year after year. But there's a paradox at the center of African football, where we export talent successfully, but we do not retain enough value from that talent. Let me give you a practical example. A young player develops in West Africa, moves abroad for a relatively low transfer fee, and within a few years becomes worth $10 million. And the question becomes, where was the long-term value captured? And in most cases, not within Africa. And that is why governance matters. Because governance determines whether football becomes merely a talent export pipeline or whether it becomes a sustainable economic ecosystem. And right now, Africa is rich in football talent, but in many areas still developing institutional strength. So let's briefly look at the ecosystem within Africa football. And to understand this properly, we must stop thinking about football as simply a sport. Oh, okay. And football is an ecosystem. Players depend on agents for opportunities. Agents depend on clubs and networks. Clubs depend on federations for structure and competition. Federations depend on governments, sponsors, broadcasters, and international institutions. And every part of the system is interconnected. And when one part becomes unstable, especially governance structures, the consequences spread across the ecosystem. For example, if federation disputes disrupt competitions, sponsors lose confidence. And when sponsors lose confidence, clubs lose revenue. And when clubs lose revenue, players suffer. And that is why governance is not simply administrative. Governance shapes the health of the entire football economy. So maybe just briefly, let's look at what is governance. It's the decision-making, accountability, transparency, rule of law. And governance is often misunderstood as bureaucracy or paperwork, but governance is much deeper than that. So governance is fundamentally about how decisions are made, how authority is exercised, and how accountability is enforced. It determines who has the power, how that power is used, and what happens when things go wrong. So in football, governance affects everything, in my opinion, and opinions can differ on this. It affects league operations, it affects financial transparency, player transfers, regulatory enforcement, and even institutional trust. And perhaps most importantly, governance determines whether stakeholders believe the system is credible, because football is not only built on talent, it is built on trust. So what happens when governance fails? And we see corruption, instability, financial opacy, and lost investment. And when governance fails, the consequences are never abstract. So they become visible very quickly. We begin to see corruption, or at a minimum, the perception of corruption. We see leadership disputes disrupting competitions. We see financial opacy when stakeholders no longer understand how money flows through the system. And perhaps most importantly, we lose the opportunity. So lost sponsors, lost partnerships, and lost investment. And weak governance does not merely create inefficiency, it destroys the value. And investors are extremely sensitive to uncertainty because capital flows towards systems that demonstrate credibility, transparency, and stability. We look at the CAF case on the CAF governance crisis. So a few years ago, Madam, I'm sorry, African football experienced a significant governance crisis within CAF leadership. And of course, there were investigations, allegations, and eventually external oversight involving FIFA. And regardless of legal outcomes, the reputational consequences were significant. Sponsors began questioning institutional credibility, stakeholders began questioning transparency, and globally, confidence in African football governance weakened. And this is an important lesson because governance failures do not remain internal, they become public, and once trust is damaged publicly, rebuilding credibility becomes extremely difficult. We now look at the FIFA 2015 scandal. And again, this is not only an African issue. In 2015, FIFA itself faced one of the largest corruption scandals in global sports history, where senior officials were arrested, investigations spread across multiple jurisdictions, sponsors publicly expressed concerns, and the global trust in football governance was shaken. And what happened next is equally important because FIFA introduced reforms with stronger ethics structures, greater compliance oversight, and increased transparency mechanisms. And the lesson here is critical because governance crises can be corrected, but that cost of failure is enormous. We move on to Nigeria, and we look at the NFF leadership disputes. So Nigeria provides a powerful example of governance instability at national level. And the Nigeria Football Federation has experienced repeated leadership disputes, often involving tension between football governance structures and government intervention. And at times, these disputes create threats of FIFA suspension. And now imagine the effect of that uncertainty. Players become uncertain about competitions, sponsors become uncertain about partnerships, clubs become uncertain about the stability, and governance instability, of course, creates ecosystem instability. And uncertainty is one of the fastest ways to weaken investor confidence. Now back home, Kenya case study, where federation was dissolved and FIFA introduced a suspension over the federation. So again, Kenya provides an even clearer example of governance consequences. When Football Federation leadership was dissolved by government authorities, FIFA responded by suspending Kenya from international football. And the people most affected were not the administrators, it was the players. Because players lost the opportunity to compete internationally, careers were then disrupted, development pathways were interrupted, and this reminds us that governance failures are never only administrative issues, they affect livelihoods, careers, and the future. You look at the neighbors in the south, South Africa football, structured governance and commercial progress. So South Africa offers a different perspective where, compared to many African markets, there's relatively stronger governance structure, greater corporate involvement, and more organized commercial systems. But even the challenges remain. We still see financial sustainability. Challenges remain in financial sustainability, club efficiency, and maximizing commercial value. And this again teaches us something important, that governance is not simply about having structures, but it is how effectively those structures perform. And now over to most of the people in this room, the role of agents. Opportunity, access, growth, but also risk. So now let us bring this conversation closer to this room, because governance is not only about federations, it's also about agents. And agents are central actors within the football ecosystem. You are the bridge between talent and opportunity. You shape careers, you influence transfers, you influence financial flows within football, but in weak governance environment, unclear regulation creates risk, not only for players, but for agents themselves. And when informal systems dominate, transparency becomes weaker and exploitation becomes easier. Let's look at the FIFA agent regulations briefly. When you talk about licensing, transparency, and commission caps. This is why FIFA introduced football agent regulations. And the objective was clear to create greater professionalism, predictability, and transparency within the agent ecosystem. And licensing requirements create accountability. And transparency requirements reduce hidden structures or transactions. And even commission structures aim to protect players and clubs. And formal dispute resolution mechanisms create clearer governance pathways. But regulations alone are never enough, because the effectiveness of regulation depends entirely on implementation and enforcement. So we look at the compliance gap when it comes to governance, and this is where regulation versus reality becomes a pull. So across many African football markets, there remains a significant gap between regulation and reality. So many regulations may exist on paper, but enforcement remains inconsistent. We have informal intermediaries continue operating, education around compliance is often limited, and as a result, systems become partially formal and partially informal at the same time. And the challenge is not simply introducing regulation. However, the challenge is transitioning ecosystems toward practical and sustainable compliance. When you want to look at when we look at digital governance, and this is where we're talking about data, tracking, and transparency, this is where innovation now becomes critical. Digital systems can significantly strengthen governance. They can improve player registration systems, track transfers transparently, store contracts securely, and monitor financial transactions more effectively. And by reducing reliance on manual processes, technology reduces opportunities for manipulation and error. And technology, therefore, cannot replace governance, but it strengthens integrity within governance systems. Within global versus Africa, structured systems again versus fragmented systems. When we compare many African football systems to more structured football markets globally, the differences become clear. In highly developed systems, we see processes are centralized, data is reliable, and enforcement is consistent. And in many African contexts, systems remain fragmented, data again remains incomplete, and even enforcement varies significantly. So this is not criticism. This is simply a reality we must acknowledge honestly if improvement is going to happen. So how do we create collaboration? And this is where I reiterate again, no single actor can fix the system. So no single stakeholder can solve these problems alone. Federations cannot do it alone. Agents cannot do it alone. Governments cannot do it alone, and this requires structured collaboration. So shared standards, shared accountability, and long-term alignment between stakeholders, because sustainable football ecosystems are never built by isolated actors. They are built collectively. So when you look at governance equals money, maybe this is where I could get most of your attention. Governance, trust, investment, growth. And again, governance is not only about rules, it's also about economics, because investors invest where they trust systems. Sponsors align with organizations that demonstrate stability and integrity. Broadcasters commit where competitions are predictable and professionally managed. When governance is strong, capital flows into the ecosystem. And when governance is weak, capital leaves the ecosystem. So governance is not separate from commercial growth, but governance enables commercial growth. And I would like to look at this 4-pillar model, where we talk about governance, compliance, innovation, and collaboration. So what is the way forward? African football must focus on these key pillars. First, we need to look at governance reform, building transparent and accountable institutions. And secondly, we need to look at regulatory compliance, in ensuring rules are not only written, but enforced. Thirdly, digital innovation, modernizing systems and improving transparency. And fourth, collaboration, where we align stakeholders around shared objectives. And these are not abstract concepts, they are practical foundations for long-term football development. So what is the risk of inaction? We see talent loss, revenue loss, and reputational damage. So if you fail to act, the consequences are clear. Africa will continue exporting talent without retaining sufficient value. We will continue losing investment opportunities. We will continue facing reputational challenges globally, and we will remain dependent on external systems rather than building sustainable internal ecosystems. And the cost of inaction is extremely high. So what is the opportunity when it comes to Africa's football economic and scale? But if we get this right, the opportunity is enormous. And Africa has the talent, Africa has the population, Africa has the passion, and increasingly, Africa has global football relevance. And with stronger systems, stronger governance, and stronger collaboration, African football can become not only a talent supplier, but a globally competitive football economy. And again, brings me to my closing, because Africa needs stronger systems. So allow me to close with this. Africa does not need more talent. Africa needs stronger systems. Africa needs governance. Africa needs integrity. Africa needs collaboration. And if we ally these elements successfully, Africa will not only simply participate in global football, Africa will help shape its future. And perhaps it is fitting that we are having this conversation here in Cape Verde, and our gracious host for this conference. A country that has qualified for the FIFA World Cup for the first time in history, and that achievement did not happen by accident. It reflects what becomes possible when vision, organization, development, and belief begin to align. Because progress in football is never accidental, it is built through systems, built through leadership, built through long-term commitment. And that is the opportunity African football now has before it. So thank you, and this leaves me to my last, and again, just a discussion. Feel free to do that. And before I leave the stage, I would like to open the discussion with one question. What is the biggest barrier to enforcing agent regulations within your country? Because identifying the challenge honestly is the first step towards resolving it. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joel from Liberia, an agent. I would love to ask this question. In Liberia, the female football is growing. The girls are playing, but in Monrovia, where we're from, it's a secular state. So when you bring players from the rural area in Liberia, and they come to the female team, the elite female team, you know, because there's not a lot of awareness when it comes to sexuality. Most of the girls that have traditional beliefs or maybe religion beliefs, when they come into the team, they meet girls who are free. Some of them are lesbians in the team. But then when they start training with those girls, for what other reason, the girls who come from the interior, who are with strong beliefs, intend to not want to play in those teams again anymore. Because they feel like they're being molested and they don't understand what's going on. So what are some of the protocol can our federations take on those kind of issues? And then secondly, I want to ask again, what happens to boys between 16 to 18 who are athletes, but legally they are kids, all right? Legally they are children, but playing professional football or plays in a professional team? What happened to their safeguard rights?
I'm not sure if that was a question or comment. Yeah. 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 I think that's one of the areas where, again, we cannot simply adopt global policies to operate in different, cultures and socioeconomic countries that are, again, generally different from, I would say, the European or Eurocentric systems that are available. And this is why I say oftenly is that we need to adopt safeguarding policies or structures that can be applicable to all these different cultural dynamics, because Africa is very diverse. What you're explaining is simply what exists in almost every country in Africa, where we have different languages, we have different tribes, we have different religions again, and we have different cultural dynamics that everyone is exposed to, has been brought up with. So I think it's generally around creating the understanding and education and awareness around that. And this is where I would say the foundation comes from. Me understanding you, where you come from, and knowing what you stand for, and not using that as a way to now either discriminate you or segregate you, but just because I don't understand what you're doing and how you operate on a day-to-day. So I would say for me, it's education, awareness, and capacity building around people understanding the different people and from the different dynamics that we come from. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Karina No. We've had a wonderful section. We've had two keynote presentations. Quickly, we'll be moving to a panel discussion, but I want to appeal to our discussants and the moderator. Please, for the sake of those who are translating, maybe you just have a little pause when you're speaking so that those translating could get what you're about to pass out to the audience. So please, for subsequent speakers, when speaking, please just some few seconds pause before your next line of thought. Then we'll be having a discussion we ought to have yesterday, but we couldn't have it. We're trying as much as we can to see how we can compress some of the stated topic. So we'll be discussing regulating agent-club relationships, best practices for fair and transparent agreements in Africa. And the panelists we have here, we have Mr. Andy Furness and Mustapha Diop. We have Pius Ndukoku and yours sincerely, Eddie Ugbemudia. So I will quickly just ask you to just come on the stage while we discuss this very important topic. Ms. Pius? I think I saw Diop around, I don't know. Please, if someone could help me get his attention quickly, because we're managing the time, we have to start off. Translator. Okay. The tall, is he outside? Diop, you are in this panel. Okay, I think we just progress maybe with your introduction first, for the sake of our audience, and before Andy. Okay.
Hi everyone. Thank you once again to our hosts here and to the African Football Agents Association and FIFA for the invite. It's been an exceptional day so far, yesterday, and looking forward to the day ahead. I'm Andy Furness. I'm from the Football Association of England, from the Player Status Department there. We have responsibility in England for the regulation of football agents, and I've been working there now for 15 years, over 3 different sets of agents regulations. So hopefully I have some insight in this area.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Pius Nduwoku. I'm from Nigeria, though I practice out of Dallas, United States of America. I've been in sports law practice for the past 7 years. For those at FIFA and CAF, I think they know me because of our interface, and I would love to thank AFAC for extending the invitation to me.
C'est un plaisir de nous retrouver ce matin pour échanger sur le thème, et en attendant que la traduction puisse passer pour qu'on puisse en discuter. Je vous remercie.
Right. I think the information I got for the media that they are still finding it difficult to configure the French translation. We had it yesterday. I really don't know about today, but we just have to progress with the conversation, and I hope we can manage the situation within our time. So, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be discussing a very important aspect relating to the relationship between clubs, football agents, regulating them in the best practice for fair and transparent agreements in Africa. Now we'll start. I'll start with you, Andy. What is currently on ground, considering from where you're coming from in the English FA? How is the relationship like with football agents and clubs in the UK?
Yeah, in England, I think important to add from a member association, from a governing body perspective, we can't be in the room with clubs and agents, so a lot of our role is about creating a framework for them to be able to liaise with each other well, be able to share information, and be able to have a clear structure of how they should be working. In England, the relationship between clubs and agents is good. Obviously, you have moments where there's clash, and these are high value and a high number of transactions as well that they're dealing with. So there's a lot there, but we have things to try and mitigate that in England. So we have standard representation agreements, we have IDs, we have a set of regulations now which clubs and agents who've been in the market for a while are generally very used to. So it's a framework that they know how they're operating in. They generally have an idea of what they're doing. When we get involved, we'll try and act as a mediator and try and share information between both parties and try and assist where we can if they are running into trouble. But from our perspective, the relationships with clubs and agents in England is a good one.
All right, thank you so much. Piles, progressing from Andy, we have instances whereby agent dealing with club, sometimes they fail to disclose important information to these clubs, especially as relates to what they will benefit from transaction. And we're looking at it from the perspective of transparency. As a sports lawyer, have there been any conflicts between clubs and agents relating to non-disclosure?
that you've handled?
Yeah, thank you very much, Eddie. When it comes to transparency, building from yesterday's conversation, as I mentioned, is a very important element in football business. And the FFAR, the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, makes it mandatory that if there is any potential conflict or if you are to represent two clients, the player and the club, you have to disclose this let's say this seeming conflict of interest or this double representation. So I think I've had instances, no, not disputes, where agents' representation agreement has been terminated by clubs and also by players because they were representing both parties, and then one of the parties was not aware. I mentioned yesterday we had a case from Costa Rica against a club in Turkey, where the agent was working for the club and working for the player at the same time, and the player, here not the club, wasn't aware. And then when he found out, he had to immediately terminate the agreement with the agents for not disclosing the conflict of interest. So I think as the FFAR mandated, it's very important that when agents find themselves in that situation, if no conflict exists, you should disclose that double representation or that double interest. And if a conflict of interest exists, I think the best approach would be recuse yourself or step back from the transaction.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I don't know if the translation is fixed now for Parse. Okay.
On demande des excuses, là on est en train d'essayer, parce que j'ai appelé le monsieur qu'on avait déjà combiné, il n'est pas arrivé. Mais maintenant, on est en train d'essayer d'avoir quelqu'un pour traduire en français, d'anglais en français. Mais il faut que les gens qui parlent anglais, ils parlent plus doucement et qu'ils s'arrêtent un peu quand ils parlent. Après, l'autre monsieur ou la madame, je ne sais plus, et va traduire en français. Je suis désolée.
Job, I hope you got the message. I really don't know how to ask my questions to you because of the issue with translation. So, but we still just need to progress. Let's hope the issue with translation is fixed before the end of this conversation. So, Andy, I will be back to you again. On issues relating to club and agents, most of the time, we have instances whereby some of these agents, they tilt towards the club. They just want to see how they satisfy all the needs, or will I say the desires of the clubs, and at the detriment of the players. Now, from your own perspective, being that you worked in the players' department, how can the players' rights be protected in an agent-club relationship? Talking about the players right now, what the player wants, how can it be protected in that midst of that confusion?
I think that, and that's one of the key elements of our regulations, is focusing on conflicts of interest. So it's already been mentioned, and I think it's an excellent point, is that those need to be declared up front. Something that's also key, and we do see a sort of grey areas here and blurred lines, is it being clear who the agent is acting for in the transaction. And we will get it at the end of the line and it will be presented to us in a certain way, but that needs to be clear throughout, and that needs to be clear from everyone involved in the transaction. So occasionally you may see it could be a sporting director or a chairman negotiating something directly with an agent, but the administrative staff and the football admin staff may have a different idea of what those discussions are. So for us, that sort of upfrontness, clarity, openness is the key there. And to back to the original point, in managing these conflicts of interest, and which our regulations cover, is what we can do from a governing body perspective to try and ensure that the players' rights are looked after in a negotiation.
Okay, thank you. I believe one thing that is very paramount with FIFA, FIFA usually prefer if the player is satisfied. That's why they are set up of all regulation to make sure that nothing should deprive the player from playing football. irrespective of contract disputes or whatever issues that affect the relationship between the player and the club. The player should be given the opportunity to express himself, to continue with his professional career. Pius, I still want to come back to you. Considering that currently the service cap on the FFA is currently suspended, and I think one of the questions from the agents body, most of them that actually took FIFA to the ECJ, was about the cap not being fair, considering that some of them, they invest so much in some of these players, and they still want to get at least a fair share of return from their investment. Now, good, the cap is currently suspended, but what do you think would be a fair rate to be given to, let's say, agents for the work they've done on players, especially I'm looking at it from the angle of players' representative, and which is also a bone of contention, the reason why FIFA was taken to court.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eddie. I think this question would have been answered best by an agent, but I'll come from the regulatory point of view, which is the principle of pacta sunt servanda, that once both parties agree to a contract or contractual terms, those terms must be respected. So I felt, or I feel, when I read the regulations when it came out, I felt FIFA overreached. It was an overreaching from FIFA, because you cannot regulate how parties should negotiate. I feel like I'm an attorney here, and I would not want somebody to regulate how much I charge my clients. When I represent you, we agree on a percentage, and I think nobody should interfere as long as it is not excessive or exploitative. So asking me if I feel that what I think should be the ideal percentage, I don't think I'm an authority to state what I think should be an ideal percentage, because as an attorney, when I charge clients, it depends on the volume of the transaction, the legal expertise required, and the complexity of the contractual situation. But I feel that at the end of the day, FIFA should allow parties to observe the principle of pacta sunt servanda. That is, whatever they agree on should be the final say, and not trying to regulate what they should discuss. Though I think one of the reasons why FIFA did this is that you see some agents, from my experience in Africa, I've had to work for a player who pays his agent 70% of his salary every month. So these are, like, I think these cases they are numerous in Africa, where players play. And then I had a case last year from Kazakhstan, where a player sent me his contract, and I asked him, how much do you earn? He told me he earns 5,000 a month. And then there's a sign-on fee of 60,000 in the contract. And I asked the player, where does the money go to? He said it's for the agent. So 5,000 a month times 12 is 60,000. Sign-on fee is 60,000. So the agent takes half of that money, 50%. So I think these are instances where FIFA is trying to curb. So I think we can, like, when you go to CAS look at contractual penalties. Like, they consider, like, when parties agree on penalties, is it excessive or is it proportionate? So I think FIFA can look at maybe borrow a leaf from CAS or the Swiss jurisprudence. For example, when CAS are awarding interest rates, they say the maximum under the Swiss law is 18% per annum. So I think FIFA can borrow a leaf from that and say, okay, agents, you can negotiate up to 20%. I'm not saying that should be the cap, but I think that might be fair to agents, because I think traditionally what everybody operates on is 10%. But if you give that lasticity or give that ceiling for it to extend to like 18, 20%, I think agents will fight back, because I think the crux of the fight is the service cap. So I think, in as much as I push for the principle of pacta sunt servanda, I also think that there should be a cap. So I'm like in between the both words. Yeah, allow parties to negotiate, but the negotiation should be fair. 50% is excessive, 40 is excessive, 60 is excessive. So I think anything between the region of 10 to 20, I think it's a fair bargain.
I think, Andy, you still want to
add? Yeah. I won't answer the question. But yeah, as you'll be aware, in England, FIFA's fee cap was challenged in England and was found to be illegal. So it will be an interesting position, depending on what we hear from the ECJ, how that would unfold if the cap is okayed there. An interesting element in England about how fees are paid is generally it stays around 5%. That's sort of always been the case. You will see significantly higher and you will see lower, but on average 5% remains the same. But we have in England, a lot of clubs will pay the player's agent's fee on the player's behalf. as a taxable benefit. So I think how much the player actually foots a bill and knows how much they're paying can be an issue. They will get a tax bill at the end, but generally it's coming out, the club's paying it, it's going away, and it's just a tax implication or tax liability for the player. So something that's been discussed a lot in England over the years is a player pays model, and whether that would sort of help get to a more reflective and accurate fee of the work that's carried out. I don't know if that's the solution, but it's certainly something that's been discussed before in England.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. Let me just go around with this last set of questions. All right, the question now is about the issue of maybe club reneging on earlier agreement, maybe that have given rise to so many disputes as relate to agent-club relationship. I think I have an experience where an agent actually negotiated a deal, and the club was the releasing club, which is a selling club. And before then, they already had an agreement on the percentage has come to the agent. But unfortunately, when the payment came, the club decided to change the goalposts, to decide to say, oh, what is going to the agent is too much. But this was actually agreed before the agent negotiated and secured the deal. And certainly that will give rise to a dispute, because whatever that was agreed initially, now the club have decided not to go with it. So in this instance, and we should also lead them maybe going to arbitration or any form of mediation for resolution. I look at it from the aspect of an agent, me being an agent, that sometimes this club, because they are the club, they own the economic right of these players, FIFA is against third-party ownership. They do all these things because they believe that, oh, these agents, whatever they do, let them go and spend their money to see how they can get this money. I believe it's not too fair. I don't know. But with your relationship with club, I don't know if you've actually had experience with club that maybe they've agreed on a particular fee for an agent, but when it is time for them to pay, they now say, oh, no, we're not going to pay this.
Yeah, I guess there's two different elements to that. There's agreeing to pay up front and then not paying. So, and that being what was declared to the FA and what's set out in all the relevant contracts. There's also declaring something to the FA or not including something in the contract, and then it transpiring that something was agreed on the side or something was agreed verbally or over email, and that creating an issue. The second of those would be a regulatory matter for the FA. So if it's not been declared, if there's no relevant representation agreement in place, that would be something we'd look to take disciplinary action against the club and potentially the agent in that matter, or even the player if they're representing them, but that's less likely. And we do see that occasionally. So an agent will be chasing payment, and it will transpire that agent was never declared to us on the paperwork. The second of those, where if a club doesn't pay, from our perspective, we've never generally got involved in those from a governing body perspective. It's been a recommendation or to go via our arbitration process. So I'll mention it later when I talk about the sort of domestic regulation system in England. We have an arbitration system within our own rules, which is agents, clubs, players are required to go down on if it's of a completely domestic nature, and that's built into our representation agreement. So it would be left to the parties to manage through that process. But it's certainly it's something we see. I mean, in England, we're in a fortunate position where financially most clubs are strong and they're able to make the payments. So we don't see it as much, but yeah, it is an issue we see.
Okay, Pius, I don't know if you still have one or two comments on that, because that's relating to clubs.
Well, he spoke from England's perspective. We're in Africa.
We're Africa, yeah.
So this is a different reality here. And I think as you guys are agents, so you always, I think it's a common thing. It's a common thing here. You take a player to a club. The club tells you when this player moves, you're getting 10%. Maybe they don't have hope that the player would grow.
Yeah,
and then after like a year, the player moves for a very huge amount of money, and then the club punches the calculator. 10% is too much. I can't pay this guy. Of course, it's a normal, it's an everyday affair in Africa. And then, as we mentioned yesterday, the agents are left without much to do. Maybe approach CAS. Of course, I was talking to you earlier on about a case we handled in CAS last month, and the advance, of course, was 60,000 Swiss franc.
Yeah.
That's about $75,000 to prosecute a case at CAS. So apart from like in Africa, like how many of these agents can, like, of course they might have the money, but are they willing to like put their money into an arbitration process that might take 3 years or 2 years without like, yeah, so because of this host of club, they know this, they have lawyers who advise them. So agents are now left to agents are left to come back to the club and try to get whatever crumb they can get. Or in the words of Daniel yesterday, they are now to explore diplomacy, like negotiations with the club just to get what they have agreed earlier on. But I think the sooner ECJ resolve this issue, and we have the agent chambers back and running, so agents can go back, can always go there for free. I think I think that will curb this issue or this menace in Africa, because it's really a big issue in Africa where clubs don't want to respect agreements with agents.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much. With that, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 reactions from the room concerning the topic of discussion relating to club and agent relationship, fair and transparent dealing, especially in Africa concept and the football ecosystem in Africa. Do we have any question from the audience? Okay, please. Just come forward a little, please.
Good morning. David Akintunde Olawi from Nigeria. I just want to share a little experience. There's this girl, the player that I've been working with for quite some time. Right now she plays in the national team, Nigeria national team. But when she's about to have a scholarship abroad, she introduced me as the agent. But the school says they don't want her with any agent. They just want this girl to just come have the deal directly with the girl. So I want to know what you advise the agent to do in such cases. And then in Nigeria, I have the same experience too with a boy. Took the boy to a club, and the club said, no, we just want the player, we don't want the player with an agent. What do you advise an agent to do in such case?
I think maybe Andy should give a little tip on that, because personally I've had such experience also. Maybe my clients going to a club and they introducing me as their agent. They say, oh, Eddie, we don't want to talk. We're no longer interested in your service. And that ends.
Yeah, practically I haven't been in that position, but from an English football perspective, and I know that doesn't necessarily help here, our regulations would prevent that from happening. So you would report it to the governing body. There's a requirement that the club will deal with the player's representative in that case. I know you're in a very difficult situation there where you want to get the best for your client, and that club may be the best for your client, but they're refusing to speak to you. But I think that's having upfront, honest, open conversations with your client in those circumstances about what the situation is and what you both want to achieve from it at the end of the day. I would certainly not recommend to any player to go into negotiations without their agent present if that's what they want. If they don't want their agent there, then yeah, go for it. You're free to do that. But if they want their agent there, I think I would be suspicious of the club's motives and think, is this the right place for me? If that was the case.
Okay. Yeah. Pius?
But Andy, we wish what you said is applicable, would apply here. That would be great. Well, for your first question, because I practice in the United States, so I think I will answer the first limb of your question. You said the girl got scholarship and she was going to the US. So the US has a very unique system. We have the NCAA, that regulates college sports in the United States. So they have their regulations as to who can be an agent and who can represent these players while they do college sports. So the FFAR does not extend there. In fact, if you go to the FIFA TMS, go to type any MLS club, there's a caveat there, and I will quote it for you. It says, "We have constantly advised FIFA that the United States would not pay training compensation." So they've constantly advised FIFA that they will not pay training compensation, and they don't pay training compensation. Though recently, they've started paying because there are decisions against them. So when it comes to your first question, so there's a different regulation entirely that regulates relationship of athletes, student athletes, and their agents in the United States. And then for the second one, I wish what Andy said would be applicable, and I hope, thank God we have Madam Fatma here. She would drive this force in Africa and help us like with CAF and the MAs, because when we're talking about yes, Mr. Sholeke mentioned something, the biggest problem we have in Africa, which I will keep mentioning in football, is the member associations. Because if they tell the clubs to do a particular thing, the clubs have to do that particular thing. So I think the MAs have to do more to sanitize the system and to protect the agents. And if the club says they don't want to deal with you and your agent, we know what it is here in Africa. We always say something. What we have is better than what we have at home. So we have no option than to go with what we have at the moment. If I'm in that situation, I'll give the player a simple advice. Go on with the transaction. The agent can be heard, but cannot be seen. So whatever the club tells you, you pass through your agent. The word is digital. The agent advises you as if he's there or if he's not there. And we've had that instances, and I'll tell the club, since I don't have an agent, or you don't want to deal with my agent, you have to increase my sign-on fee. So in that same way, I'm able to, as Daniel said yesterday, it's diplomacy. So I think in Africa, more of diplomacy works in sports and football rather than law. It's more of diplomacy because, there are a lot of injuries and damages without remedies in our ecosystem here. So until we have that robust legal framework, we have to continue exploring diplomacy.
All right, thank you so much. Just to add to it as we close this section, I think a personal experience I've also had relating to maybe my clients being players. When they get to clubs and clubs say they don't want an agent, I usually tell them, just as you mentioned, whatever they give to you to sign, make sure you share with me. So for David, the advice I also give is for the clients you represent, maybe you are in a situation when they have been asked not to present you as an agent, you educate them that whatever is given to them to sign, they should sign immediately. At least you should tell the club, give me 24 hours, let me study it. I believe within that window of 24 hours, you could reach out to you study and fine-tune the contract. So you are not in a picture, but you are being heard, just like Pius mentioned. So I think that is a method you could adopt. And with that, I just want you to join your hands together as we share these young men, gentlemen up for a wonderful time on this topic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Photographer is still here. Where is the photographer? Are you supposed to please be quick? Diop, so sorry. We hope to visit soon. All right, thank you so much, Pius, Andy, and Diop. Yeah. So quickly, we'll be moving to another panel discussion. For AFAC 2026, just like the one we had last year in Rabat, women football has actually taken a center stage, and we must commend the growth and development of women football in Africa. Quickly, we'll be discussing the topic relating to women football in Africa, growth and opportunities,
And we'll be having Anne Maria Diaz-Borges. And the panelists we have here, we'll be having Madam Julie Motios, Rebecca, okay, Maria Tavares, I think Maria is not on ground now, and also Madam Besti Kazadi, and Nasir Jadari. If we can move to that conversation quickly. On women football in Africa, women football development in Africa, growth, opportunities, growth and opportunities. Okay, I think the panelists are not ready because of our time. We'll move to another keynote presentation on the role of football agents in ensuring compliance of grassroots football clubs and training rewards in African nation, which is a keynote presentation by Pius Udoboku, which is the managing counsel, PSN Sportiva LP, and founder of FLAM. So let's jam our hands together as we have that presentation from Pius. Please.
Thank you very much. So I'll be taking the topic, the role of football agents in ensuring compliance of grassroots football clubs in Nigeria. Yeah, for those that know me, you know this is a topic I'm very passionate about, and it is very important for the economic growth of football in Africa. Before I go to my introduction, in the last 5 years, over $100 million has been paid into Africa as training compensation and solidarity contribution. And Africa has lost ×4 of that amount because of the lack of knowledge and due diligence and compliance of training clubs. And as you would see, one of the major highlights is the issue of Nicholas Jackson, where Casa Sport in Senegal lost the sum of 185,000 euros when the player moved from Villarreal to Chelsea because they were not aware of, or they didn't know the process of the EPP up to the FIFA clearing house. And before they could get to know of it, the EPP was already approved. There was a determination, there was an allocation statement, and they were left without a remedy under the extant FCH regulations. So today, football is a global economic system driven by transfers, player development, and regulatory compliance. FIFA has established core principle, which is clubs that invest in training young players must be rewarded financially because this is the only way to maintain the talent pipeline. Without this money going back to the grassroots, there is no way to ensure that these talents will continue flowing. And when you go to the transfer market, if you look at the world as it is currently, if you go to the England, we have Semenyo in Man City, who is from Ghana. We have Kudus in Tottenham. If you go to Serie A, we have so many of Nigerian players there. If you come to La Liga, we have Ademola Lookman. If you come to Turkey, we have Osimhen, we have Paul Onuachu. So you see African players moving. You have Omar Mamouche, who came to Man City for 50 million euros, and about 1.8 million came to Egypt as solidarity contribution. So this is very important for the sustenance and growth of football in Africa, because we don't have so much transfer fees in Africa. In Nigeria, where I come from, we've never transferred a player from Nigeria to Europe for 5 million from Nigeria because of the different infrastructures we have there. So what we rely upon heavily or majorly is training compensation and solidarity contribution coming into Africa. So this is training compensation, financial reward for developing young players. Solidarity contribution is the redistribution of transfer fees to training clubs. Later in the presentation, I will distinguish these two concepts, because whenever clubs call me, they will tell me, we want our training compensation, we want our training compensation. And I'll tell you, hey, this player is 27, you can't get training compensation. They're like, oh, we want training compensation. So later I'm going to distinguish the two of them. Then we have the FIFA Clearinghouse. It's a centralized automated payment system that ensures that training rewards are distributed fairly and transparently to training clubs globally. As I mentioned earlier, African clubs will lose a lot of money every year. We've been losing before the clearinghouse came into force, and we are losing more now because of the lack of knowledge of the applicable regulations. You see clubs, their players get transferred, they just relax, and after 1 year, they call you on the phone and tell you, hey, our player moved to Chelsea for 10 million. We want to get our training compensation or solidarity contribution. And you ask them for the player's name, they send you the player's name, you check it on TMS, you view the EPP, and you will see approved. And they are nowhere to be found. And they tell you, sue FIFA, sue NL, like, sue FIFA to who? Sue NFF to who? Sue FIF to who? So the lack of knowledge and lack of knowledge of the applicable regulations is causing more harm than good. And I think the agents have a major role to play in ensuring that these clubs, once the player is transferred, be able to notify the training clubs that this and that have to be done in order for them to get their training rewards. Okay, who's a football agent? We all know the definition. A person who's, according to Eddie, who's licensed, you must be licensed, because that's the key criteria. You must be licensed to perform football agent services as defined by the FFAR. I summarized their rules in 3 bullet points. I call them compliance facilitators, because you must comply with the applicable regulations when negotiating transfers, and you must ensure that the contractual terms your client or your player is agreeing to is in line with the extant regulations of FIFA or the applicable national federation. I also call them documentation supervisors. I think they are the first point of contact before the player even reads his contract. Before a player signs a contract, or before a club in Africa sees a transfer agreement, the agent sees that transfer agreement and sees all the contractual terms embedded therein. And we have a grassroots protector. As I mentioned earlier, they can be likened to grassroots protectors if they take up that mantle or that role of protectors, because I think their role is very critical in Africa in bringing the awareness of the FIFA Clearinghouse regulations to the knowledge of the training clubs. Training compensation and solidarity contribution, very interesting for me. I'm going to draw a distinction here. Training compensation is a payment that's made for the efforts of training clubs for the years 12 to 21, ending up until 23, for when a player signs his first professional contract, or during the event of a subsequent transfer of a professional, then the last professional club gets training compensation. Very important here, we must draw the distinction. It stops at 23, but for clubs that have trained a player from the ages of 12 to 21, unless you can establish that before the age of 21, the player stops training. And I'll give instances, someone like Lamine Yamal, let's say he moves as a free agent, Barca cannot claim training compensation because he's already an established professional. He's played in Syria, he's played in La Liga, he's won the Euro, he's going to play at the World Cup, so he's no longer, even though he's less than 21, he's finished his training, he's an established professional. One important factor of training compensation I don't find interesting is the fact that under Articles 20 of the FARSTP, there's the last sentence says, the principle of training compensation shall not apply to women's football. I was discussing it yesterday, and then people will advance arguments, or persons will advance arguments that the level of growth between the men's football and women's football are not on the same level. So that is why the principle of training compensation does not apply to women's football. I beg to differ there. Even though, for example, when you go to clubs in England, Belgium, France, Germany, Spain, Netherlands, they are category 1 clubs. That's a club in the early divisions, and training competitions can range up to 90,000 a year for the majority years. That's 16 and above. I think even though the female football might not be on the same level financially, but I think assigning some amount of money, let's say 5,000 per year for female football as training compensation, 2,000. I'm from Nigeria, even 1,000 a year for the year. If a grassroots club in Nigeria gets $5,000 for a female player they have trained, I think that will go a long way to encourage them to continue training female players and invest in women's football. But under Article 20, this says the principle of training compensation does not apply to women's football, which I hope will be changed in the nearest future. Then solidarity contribution is governed by annexes by Articles 21 and Annex 5 of the RSTP, and it's very clear. It says it is the redistribution of transfer fees or the transfer or subsequent transfer of a professional for clubs that have trained a player from the ages of 12 to 23. Now, remember, training compensation is for clubs that have trained a player from 12 to 21 up until when he's 23. So it stops at 21. But a club that has trained a player from let's say 18 to 21 can claim training compensation if the player is transferred at 23. But if a player is transferred at on his 24th birthday, the principle of training compensation extinguishes, like it's no longer applicable. You can no longer claim training compensation because you must claim it within those years, 12 to 23 years. But solidarity contribution, even when a player is transferred at the age of 30, as long as there's a transfer fee, the clubs that have trained him from 12 to 23 will benefit from solidarity contribution, which is 5% of the transfer fees, prorated in accordance with the training years. Like when you train a player from 12 to 15, they are called the minority years, and you get 5% of the 5%. And then when you train the players from 16 up until 23, you get 10% of the 5%. So when you sum it up, you have 12 to 15 is 5% each, which is 20%. And then when you sum from 16 to 23, which is 10% each, that's 80%. That makes it the 100% of the 5% for solidarity contribution. So we come to the FIFA Clearinghouse, the objectives of the FIFA Clearinghouse. When the FIFA Clearinghouse was established late in 2022 October, the objectives were well defined and carved out. It said, process no training reward payments through a single regulated system, ensuring financial transparency for all, preventing fraud, because a lot of monies in football are being taken to places they should not be taken to, or they are being used for reasons that are not football related. And finally, promoting solidarity between the elite clubs and the grassroots clubs. Yeah, so I call this the 3-step FIFA Clearinghouse process. If you look at the FIFA Clearinghouse regulation, the first step is identification, confirming entitlements to training reward. So when the player is transferred under Articles 4 of the FIFA Clearinghouse regulation, the member associations have the obligation to automatically declare the transfer within 30 days of the transfer occurring, or manually declare the transfer within 30 days, but they must first obtain consent from the FIFA General Secretariat before they can declare it manually. Then once this is done, the EPP is generated. That is called the Electronic Player Passport. And once this is generated under Articles 5 of the FIFA Clearinghouse regulations, it is left for an inspection period of 10 days. During this period, clubs can look at it, federations can look at it, and if you think you ought to participate and you're not participating, you can write your member association or your federation to contact FIFA to include you. And I think this is where agents play a critical role. When a player is transferred, it's your duty to call the attention of the clubs, the grassroots clubs, to contact their federations to ensure that they are participating in the EPP process. So we have the inspection stage, which is 10 days. And after this, it goes to the review stage, which is 15 days. And from there, it goes to the completion stage. It goes to validation, where the FAC General Secretariat checks all the documentation to make sure that the information are correct and accurate. And if after doing that, they find some inconsistencies, they send it back to completion stage for corrections and input. Once this is done, it moves back to validation, and then it goes to approval. That's when we have the EPP determination. And under there, once it's approved, you can no longer make any corrections. The only remedy you have is to appeal to CAS pursuant to Articles 57 of the FIFA statutes, and you have 21 days. So once this is generated, for training compensations, once an EPP is generated, the allocation statement comes immediately with it. But for solidarity contribution, once an EPP is approved, you have to wait for the buying clubs to upload proof of payment. So once the proof of payment is uploaded, an allocation statement will be generated in accordance or in proportion to the uploaded proof of payment. And once this is done, it is transmitted to the FIFA clearing house, where they will do the compliance assessment and payment is made to the training clubs. So I already explained this, what the EPP contains for those in the English FA and Europe and South America and North America. Once an EP is generated, the federation already have the records, because these players from the ages of 12, when the transfers are done through the TMS or through the DTMS, so the federations already have these details, so it is easy to update the EPP or migrate these records. But in our own parts of the world where we come from, it's very, I would not say it's unfortunate, it's interesting. We're very interesting people, because we don't do transfers via TMS. We wait until when they deem it fit to do the transfer. So I'll use example in Nigeria and Kenya. In Nigeria and Kenya and Morocco, for example, once we have the EPP, you have to contact your federation so they can use the IPP, which is International Player Passport. There is details therein, or licenses, to now track the player's history, impute them, put the years, the category of the club, and their training categories. And then once this is done, FIFA determines if clubs are entitled to training rewards or if they are not entitled to training rewards. The compliance process at the FIFA clearinghouse, they are in three phases. The identity verification, where the clearinghouse verifies the legal status of the club, the entity that is claiming training, that is entitled to training rewards, and then they also verify the identity of persons behind these companies or these clubs. So we don't have a club being financed or being owned by terrorists or wanted persons for criminal activities. And then we have the anti-money laundering compliance, where clearinghouse will request for your financial statements, auditing you for the full financial year, and possibly your account statement, so they can look at where your money is going to. This is to avoid using football-related money to finance terrorism or non-football related purposes. And then we have the banking verification, where your banking details are verified. This is very easy. Your account number, account name, this must match with the documents this must match with your TMS name or the name on the file document. And then for us in Nigeria, you have to include your SWIFT code. Failure to comply in the clearinghouse, we have two phases of compliance assessment failure. We have the first compliance assessment failure, where for training clubs, you might get a warning and a reprimand. And when you fail the second time, you might forfeit your training rewards. And once this forfeiture is ordered, the money is paid to your member association for football development in your country. Then for training clubs, for engaging clubs or buying clubs, once you fail the first compliance assessment, which I don't agree with the sanction, I think it is largely and highly disproportionate and inadequate to compel these buying clubs to make payments in time or on time. Once you fail the first compliance assessment, a fine is imposed, and then they charge you 2.5% administrative fee of the amount you were supposed to pay. But I think this is grossly insufficient. Under the old regulations, once you don't pay within 45 days, a transfer ban is slammed on you. And once you have a transfer ban, you're unable to do transfer. And this prompts clubs to make payments. But with the current clearinghouse regulations, the structure, I think the enforcement structure is very weak. It is inadequate, and it is left training clubs vulnerable because engaging clubs have no incentive to pass compliance assessment in time. I've had instances from Czech Republic where a club has stayed for the past 3 years. They've refused to pass compliance assessments, and they're doing transfers. In Romania, we've had a club who's playing the European Conference League, and they've not passed compliance since 2023. What has FIFA slammed on them? 2.5% of the training amount, which is very low. If you're to pay 100,000 for training as training reward, 2.5% is 2,005. So why would I pay you 100,000 when I can do business with the money for 4 years and make 100% of that amount and just pay you 2.5%, which is 2.5 per year. In 3 years, that's 7,005. So I think FIFA has to do more here to make the sanctions stricter and more tight so that engaging clubs can pay this money in time, because this is the life wire of football development in Africa. As I mentioned in my introduction, Nicholas Jackson's case study. Sorry, I use AI to get the pics. So yeah. So he was transferred from Villarreal to Chelsea with a very huge amount of money. And as I mentioned earlier, the club Casa Sports, they weren't aware, they didn't have the knowledge of the FIFA clearinghouse regulations. And when they got to know about it, the EPP was already approved and allocation assessment generated. So they had to, this is an estimated amount. I had to do this based on what the transfer fee I found on transfer market. Not that I'm privy to the transfer document, please. I'm not privy to it. I did this calculation based on the transfer fee that was listed on the transfer market, 5% of it. Did my calculations with the years he spent at Casa Sports. So Casa Sports lost approximately 185,000 euros. For those in Africa, this is a huge amount of money. And this amount of money can produce 10 more Nicholas Jacksons. The callers in here, a club may develop world-class players, Nicholas Jackson, Semenyo, Osimhen. Yeah, they're playing in Europe, they're commanding transfer fees. But if you don't have complete registrations, your records are inaccurate, player passports are defective or not updated by your member federations, you don't pass compliance at the FIFA clearinghouse. When you fail compliance the first and second time, you might not get this payment and it might be forfeited. When you get to the clearinghouse and you don't pass, the money might get forfeited to your federation, and you might even be sanctioned by FIFA for not getting your own money, which I think should be reviewed, because you cannot force me to take money I don't want to take. If I don't want to get the payment, it's my choice. You should not sanction me for not taking my money. And then that is at the clearinghouse. But when you don't participate at the EPP process before the FIFA General Secretariat, you lose the money entirely. So for agents, how do you guys step in? Because for agents, most agents think their roles end with negotiating transfer agreements, and that is the end. They get their agent commissions, and that is the end of the conversation. But I think no, it is beyond that. It's our duty to develop the ecosystem in Africa. To develop these talents, we need more. We need our revenue. We need money to flow into the ecosystem. And for money to flow into the ecosystem, the highest or the biggest source of funding for grassroots clubs in Africa, or even elite clubs in Africa, these are training rewards. As I said earlier, from my research in the last 5 years, we've gotten paid about $100 million in Africa from training rewards alone, and that should tell you what it does for training clubs. Look at the transfer fees from Africa to Europe, to Asia, or within Africa in the last 5 years. We don't have a transfer fee of within Africa, 100 million. We don't have a transfer fee of Africa to Europe, 100 million in the last 5 years. We don't have that. So agents should enjoy, in as much as they do these negotiate transfers, when they work with training clubs, they should ensure proper registration, that these clubs have the proper legal structure, because we have clubs operating in Nigeria that are not even registered. All they do is play on the streets, gather cones, and they don't know anything about registration. Assist or teach, tell the grassroots clubs on the need to monitor the EPP when it comes for inspection, so that they can know whether they are participating or not, and then contact the member association to impute their details. Educate grassroots club. Many African clubs lack legal departments or compliance officers. Well, not many, about 90% of African clubs, not grassroots, even professional clubs, they don't have a legal department. So I think this is a necessity. And depending when they do this, I think agents also are educated persons to advise them on this, because when you write the FIFA agent exams, questions are being asked on the FIFA clearinghouse regulations, and then facilitate compliance assessment, help them with their documentation, the governmental documents and the banking documents, and then act as regulatory advisors to this club until they get paid. For African football, the way forward, I broke it down into we are all stakeholders. We all have to contribute our own to make it a better place. For the associations, they are not here. Strengthen national registration systems and data accuracy, because when we have these robust registration systems, then clubs will stop missing out, because whether they contact you or not, what you have to do, like they do in England, Europe, or Costa Rica, where I work, is all they do is to import the registration details from their system into the EPP, and then you don't need the clubs reaching out to you to tell you, hey, I train a player from ages 12 to 13 or 14. Then for clubs, they have to maintain accurate, complete, and up-to-date player records, because a club can tell you they train a player for 8 to 10 years, and you ask them for records, they can only show you one picture or one license. So it's very important that they have up-to-date player records. Then for agents, aside from negotiating transfer fees, you have to embrace compliance responsibilities aside transfer duties on behalf of the training clubs in Africa. And then for stakeholders, we must prioritize administrative professionalism across all levels, no matter the level we're operating and no matter who we are. Thank you very much.
If we have some questions from the audience.
Wonderful presentation, Mr. Pius. But you make it sound so easy. You called 2 days, 5 days, 7 days. But we're aware that a lot of things are not okay in the clearinghouse. We have monies of academies in Nigeria waiting for 3 years, 2 years. What could be the issue? Because in your presentation, I'm just seeing 15 days, 5 days, 10 days. And I know, even as we're in this conference, somebody called me and said, I saw you with my lawyer, Pius. Please speak to him, let my money come out. Just now, a few minutes ago. So what could be the issues happening at the FIFA clearinghouse? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Umar. As I mentioned earlier, in an ideal situation, those are the timelines. And when I was explaining further, I was talking about the compliance assessment failures by these engaging clubs and buying clubs. You saw I mentioned about sanctions. Yeah, I think FIFA is not zeroing down on people they should zero down on. The way they are attacking the agents, they have to zero down on member associations and clubs, because as I told you from my own experience, a club has deliberately refused to pass compliance for 3 years. And what are they being asked to pay? 2.5% per annum. 2.5% of 100,000 is 2,005. If I owe you 100,000 and I'm to pay you 2.5% as penalty for not paying you, I'll hold the money for 5 years. Because in 5 years, I can transform 100,000, if judiciously used, to 500,000. And what will I pay you in the 5 years? 2.5% times 5. That is 12.5%, 12,005. So I think the sanctions are grossly inadequate. So Daniel, even though you're not at the FIFA clearinghouse, but we hope you can take this message back to your colleagues that the sanctions should become stricter, or they should revert back to the old sanctions under the old system, where if you don't pay in 45 days, a transfer ban is slammed on you. I had a case in Turkey where the club did not pay in 45 days. I placed them on transfer ban. They refused to pay for 2 years. I applied for deduction of points. 6 points were taken off. They refused to pay. And I applied for relegation order. When they saw the relegation order, they paid the money in full. But under the new system, the sanctions are grossly inadequate. So I think if they can become stricter, Umar, back to your question, if FIFA can make the sanctions to become more stringent, these engaging clubs will pay faster. But that notwithstanding, I've had links in England where, of course, the English clubs they're highly compliant, where they pay so much. Where we have these challenges are basically within Africa: Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Turkey, and Eastern Europe.
David Akintunde Olawe. Mine is the solidarity competition and training competition is a very laudable innovation by FIFA. But it's a pity it doesn't really get to the real grassroots, if I say grassroots clubs or academies. Like the trend now is I own a big academy and I have a lot of money to be able to organize big scouting program. I go to this little grassroots clubs, take all these players they have been nurturing for years, and once I'm able to cross these players to Europe in the EPP, the only name that will appear as an academy this player has ever gone through from the age of 12 to whatever is only my academy. So the real grassroots academies don't really get to benefit from this innovation, this money. So I don't know what we should do about that, truly. I know the awareness is part of it. So how do we get most of these real grassroots clubs to be able, academies to be able to know about this? And then I'm suggesting maybe FIFA should have a more accessible platform where reports can be made not only through the members association, in case there is an issue like this. Because when this big name academies transfer these players and they are able to get all the training compensation to themselves, maybe later you discover, oh, this is my player, this has been paid and so on and so forth. You don't have any claim on that. Thank you.
Oh, if the first one came as a question, I would answer the first one. I mentioned earlier, one of the issues we have for the, in quotes, small clubs in Africa is lack of documentation. Like I've had a club who I had to represent. He's been training players since 2005. I was barely 10 years then. And then he's never been incorporated. He's never been affiliated. And to benefit from the grassroots, to benefit from the FAC training reward scheme, it's not automatic. It says for clubs engaging or participating in organized football. And what is organized football? Competitions or football programs organized by FIFA-recognized bodies like the MAs, confederations, and state associations. So, how would you say you're not getting paid when you don't even participate in organized football? So I think that is one of the first steps clubs have to take. For Nigeria, I'll answer for Nigeria because I have a lot of knowledge there. Get incorporated at the CAC, get affiliated with your state FA, who is in turn affiliated with FIFA, participate in the NLO, the state FAs, and so on and so forth. Have your records, have your licenses, and then when these transfers occur, you can just transmit them to the NFF.
Rebonjour. J'ai une question à poser et ça revient un peu sur tout ce qui est en train d'être dit ici depuis hier. Hier, il y a une question qui a été posée à Monsieur Diop. Elle m'a beaucoup intéressée. La question était, lorsqu'un joueur est représenté par un agent qui n'a pas de licence, à qui la faute? C'est la question qu'on a posée à Monsieur Diop. J'ai aimé sa réponse. Mais à côté des réponses qu'il a apportées, moi également, j'ai noté quelques-unes. Pour ma part, il y a le système qui est défaillant, il y a la recherche de la gratuité des clubs, il y a également l'inculture des dirigeants de football. C'est le troisième volet qui m'intéresse et c'est d'ailleurs la question que j'aurais envie de vous poser à vous. Depuis hier, on parle beaucoup du rôle d'un agent, mais on oublie le volet éducatif que l'agent également peut avoir. Un agent peut être un éducateur. Quand on prend le cas de ce qui se passe dans nos pays, j'imagine que le cas du Cameroun est le cas du Nigeria, du Cap-Vert, du Gabon et j'en passe. On a des clubs ou encore des académies qui très souvent ne sont pas éduqués sur ce que représente la présence d'un agent. Et lorsque vous avez un joueur qui arrive à signer dans un club à l'international, il y a les académies qui ne savent pas qu'est-ce qu'elles peuvent toucher, comment ça se passe et tout. En ce moment, ce ne sont pas seulement les agents véreux qui volent, si j'ai envie de, si je peux le dire comme ça. Même les agents ayant la licence souvent omettent de dire la vérité aux académies pour pouvoir mettre l'argent dans leur poche. Alors ma question est de savoir, est-ce que l'agent ne peut pas également être un éducateur? Merci.
Sorry, I don't hear French. I don't know if someone can translate to me. Maybe I can answer.
Je voudrais juste amener une précision par rapport à la question de madame, parce que la FIFA a été très claire. Aujourd'hui, il faut avoir la licence FIFA pour pouvoir représenter un footballeur. Ça, c'est clair, c'est net, c'est carré. Donc, celui qui se fait représenter même par un non-agent, on a vu le cas de Ancelotti quand il quittait le Real pour aller au Brésil. Il a été représenté par un agent qui n'avait pas la licence. Et il y a eu des sanctions qui sont tombées sur la Fédération brésilienne de football. Ça, c'est des cas d'école. Maintenant, par rapport à ce que vous dites exactement, par rapport à ce que monsieur a parlé tout à l'heure, là, c'est des trucs qui sont dans le règlement de la FIFA, les indemnités de transfert, comprendre exactement les prêts. Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un prêt? Parce que pour le cas de Nicolas Jackson, les gars du Casasport, qu'est-ce qu'ils se sont posés sur un postulat pour vouloir dire qu'il était là-bas pour un prêt temporaire. Même si c'est un prêt temporaire, ils doivent être payés. Il y a des prêts prolongés, même si tu fais 6 mois dans un club, tu dois bénéficier de ces indemnités. Maintenant, il faut comprendre ça pour être auprès des clubs et être auprès des dirigeants pour les aider à le faire, parce que la FIFA a déjà un règlement qui est clair, net et précis.
Just wait. I think they want to help with the translation. I think the translation from here, it said our sister is saying that she's not just an agent, but is also an educator of players. She educates players and also enlightening players. It's coming to. Yes. Yes, I understand. No, the translation.
Okay, I got your question. So I will start with this first. I think we all know the FIFA's position on third-party ownership and third-party TPI. I think aside from the commissions and all those things, agents are, I think agents, for me, I think they are third parties still benefiting from a transfer agreement. Transfer agreements are only for football clubs. So it flows from that solidarity contribution and training compensation should also be for training clubs. But however, as you mentioned, and as I educated here, agents have a major role to play in educating these grassroots clubs so they don't miss out on these training rewards. For example, when transfers occur, the agents are like the first point of contact. They see these transfer agreements first. They know the amounts there. So I think I said the agents have a role to play in advocacy and training and educating these grassroots clubs so they can know, because most clubs don't even know about training compensation and solidarity contribution. So I think the agents have to, aside from the transfer advising duties, you have to also assume the duty of an educator or a teacher to teach these grassroots clubs that aside from transfer fees and other entitlements, that they are also entitled to training compensation and solidarity contribution.
All right, thank you so much. And please let's just jam our hands together for Barrister Pius. Though this will be a comment because I know he does not have the response for me, but maybe Daniel will also take this back to FIFA. We have instances whereby some member associations are reluctant in imputing training years on the EPP for training clubs. In fact, while I'm here, some clubs that I represent, they sent me copies of messages they sent to the NFF TMS manager to include the training years, which is already on the local IPP, that's the one prepared by the NFF on the EPP, but it has hit a brick wall. Several reminders, they have refused to impute them, and we have instances whereby clubs will be denied their entitlement because the member association failed to impute the training years for these clubs on the EPP. And just to borrow a leaf from what David earlier asked, we have issue of some club having so much control and so much power, and if it is relating to their own players, this TMS manager, they act swiftly. But because these other smaller clubs, assuming because they don't have such influence within the member association, they are denied their entitlement. I think FIFA should look at that because the power that have been placed on the MAs to impute the training period is being abused by some certain persons, because with these clubs are supposed to be entitled to training compensation and solidarity contributions, they will be denied. So on that note, we'll be going on a short tea break for about 10 minutes. When we'll come back, the translation has been fixed. We have all the issue relating to translation are fixed. So for all my French-speaking brothers and sisters, apologies. Hopefully for the climax and all the exciting presentation we still have ahead, you'll have it in the language you understand. So let's just go on a very short break, please, just for 5-10 minutes, and we'll be back. Thank you. Yeah. presentations. Quickly, we'll be having the first keynote presentation by Mr. Andy Furness, a senior player status manager at the English FA. He will be making a presentation on domesticating the FIFA football agent regulation in Africa, a model for success. And immediately after this, we have a presentation from Mission 89 that will also be relating to the responsibility that we have as related to human trafficking. So quickly, Andy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Yes, you get to hear from me again. I'll wait for my slides to appear, and hopefully translation is working now. I introduced myself earlier, but if anyone wasn't present then, I'm Andy Furness. I work for the Football Association in England. Thank you once again for the invite to be here to present to you. Been a very informative few days, and obviously not everything we've heard those over these couple of days directly relates to English football, but it's good to take some of this knowledge back, and will certainly help shape some of how we look at things going forward. This is just a quick snapshot of the agents landscape in England. So we currently have 2,600 FA registered agents. They're individuals who need to have a FIFA license first. Over the course of a season, generally, they're involved in 2,500 transactions, which are reviewed by our team at the FA, and that's across 116 professional clubs. What we are seeing now is agents act lower down the pyramid, so at semi-professional level even, and a lot more in the women's game. So we've seen a lot more involvement lower down the pyramid and in the women's game in England. And obviously the big figure there at the bottom, the £550 million, that is what was paid by clubs to football agents in England in the 25-26 reporting period. And I guess that highlights the volumes and the value of transactions that we're dealing with. And I've lost my slide. So today I'd like to talk to you about, give you a practical overview of how we regulate football agency in England, how it interacts with FIFA regulations, and yeah, give some hopefully practical advice for both member associations and football agents. I think it came across in the panel meeting. Obviously, our experience in England is different. Our department at the FA player status team not just covers agents, it covers all these areas: player registration, UEFA licensing, UEFA player lists, all TMS matters, FIFA clearinghouse, which we've heard about already today. So the resourcing is different, we accept that, but hopefully there's some elements of this that you can take away and be used locally as well. A massively important part of how we regulate agents in England is working with our stakeholders. You can see there's more, but these are the key stakeholders. Our professional leagues, the WSL, Premier League and English Football League. The unions, so the Professional Footballers Association and the League Managers Association, football agents themselves and football agencies, the clubs, particularly at the top divisions, and of course FIFA. At the moment, we are going through a process of updating our regulations as we do every year, and a key aspect of this is working with our stakeholders. We can't really do anything, or don't want to do anything, if we don't speak to everyone involved here, and we need to get feedback from agents, we need to get feedback from the leagues and clubs to make sure what we're doing is right for English football. Obviously, we won't always agree, and obviously that might mean we proceed with something which another party isn't happy with, but an important part of that is going through that process to make sure everyone is being consulted and everyone's views have been heard. So obviously, we all know FIFA regulations exist, so why do we have a set of domestic regulations in England? We feel it's very important to have regulations which address some of the specific needs of English football, whether that be local law, whether that be just how the market works in England. You'll hear me mention this quite a few times, protection of minors. It's a very important element of our regulations, and it's an element where we've chosen to go beyond FIFA regulations. So that's something we felt we needed to have a domestic set of regulations. And the last two speak for themselves: transparency and trust and integrity of the transfer system. We need to maintain that everyone, both involved in football, watching football, can trust what they see on the field at the end of the day. And we all know the way the growing nature of football and the interest in the transfer intricacies. What people see in that world is important to what's delivered at the end. So maintaining that trust, increasing transparency, and ensuring clubs as well, players, agents have protection, and the integrity of the transfer system is upheld. So what do we include in our regulations? We have how to register as an agent in England, details on worker of minors. Again, there's probably a few more mentions. Jurisdictional matters, what's included, international and domestic transactions. Obviously, FIFA having primacy when it comes to international transactions. We deal with non-transactional activity, so approaches, representation contracts. Interests and conflicts of interest, which we discussed in the panel meeting earlier. We have quite a number of declarations and disclosures, which perhaps agents and clubs will feel is too much, but again, we feel is important to meet some of the needs we discussed earlier. What happens with the payment of fees, when can fees be paid, and what happens after they've been paid, and dealing with disputes, which again was a big topic that was discussed yesterday. So registering with the FA, you may ask, well, I've got my FIFA license, why do I have to go through another stage? In England, we try to make it as pain-free as possible. There's no fee. Your registration will remain valid so long as you don't do anything wrong. That's either lose your FIFA license or breach any of our regulations where a charge may come. And once you're registered, you can act in England, you can represent players, enter into representation contracts with players' clubs, and you also have a digital ID. The reason again behind this, sorry, the phone's ringing. The reason again we have this, similar to why we have a set of domestic regulations, is it's important for us that we can ensure football agents are bound by our regulations when they start acting in England. So we don't have to just rely on FIFA to enforce for us. We can capture the agents ourselves in terms of their actions. But it isn't just about stopping them doing things and charging people. It also offers some regulatory protection to agents, clubs and players. So when they're working in the English market, they're also protected by our regulations and some of the things that work in their favour as well. And again, protection of minors. This is our digital ID. It's something we're proud of. We know FIFA also have an ID, but we had a lot of stakeholder feedback on sort of verification of who you are as an agent and how that works. So this, you can't see a photo on there, but there would be a photo, and I've seen people have shared their ID with me at this conference, so it's good to see. And again, yeah, QR code, which goes to our agents list, and it's a requirement in our regulations for a football agent to show their digital ID once requested. So a big part of this, and Serhat presented yesterday on educating parents, and it's a challenge to get access to the parents, is then their awareness of this ID. So basically in England, you shouldn't be speaking to anyone about representing you if they can't show you this digital ID. So now get to working with minors. As you've probably gathered from what I've said already, it's an important element of our domestic regulations. It applies to everyone who wants to represent a player under the age of 18 in England. They must have completed their requirements from FIFA, so the FIFA CPD, and then the extra step involved in England is the requirement for an enhanced criminal record check. We work closely with our safeguarding team. We also have an external company we work with on safeguarding, on criminal record checks, because it's a complex issue and we're receiving criminal record checks from all around the world. So it's not just an English criminal record check we deal with. We would get them from all countries for agents who registered to work in England. So essentially, if there's any content on that criminal record check, it will go to our safeguarding team for review. as well as the sort of initial entry level to becoming allowed to represent minors, we also have sort of secondary measures which are around approaches and entering into representation contracts and other agreements for that matter. So we would prohibit an agent entering into any agreement with a minor prior to the age at which they're allowed to enter into a representation agreement. So that would include, for example, a commercial agreement. And again, finally, on payments, we would only allow a payment to be made to a football agent in relation to a professional contract. Standard representation agreements, again, it's something FIFA have as well, but we have bespoke versions for the market in England. We have player agent, club agent, subcontract and tripartite agreements, again, to match the demands of what people want in England. Our player agent contracts for a maximum length of 2 years. All of our standard contracts contain mandatory clauses which cannot be removed. Parties are obviously then free to add additional elements. They don't have to stick rigidly to our template, but they can't remove certain elements, and obviously they couldn't include any elements which would be contrary to our other regulations. An element, as I said, it was discussed yesterday, is disputes. So it covers jurisdiction and disputes, and it covers our Rule K arbitration process. They all must be lodged within 14 days of execution and lodged via our FA agents portal. So the portal is quite a big part of what we do. It interacts with all our professional and semi-professional registrations. So we have a database of every single representation agreement held with a player in England, providing they've been lodged. And as I say, it would be a breach of our regulations if they didn't lodge it. And I think that helps underpin a lot of faith in the market. So we will regularly be asked questions, who represents X player, and we'll be able to tell a club or another agent, dependent on the circumstances, the official answer. So clubs know they're dealing with the correct individual, because we know it can be an issue that lots of people come up and say, oh, I represent this player, but we have a complete database to be able to tell clubs who is. And something we hope to progress is to be able to reflect that back to clubs and them to be able to have instant access to it. So I mentioned the inclusion of disputes in the representation agreement as a mandatory clause. We have in England what we call FA Rule K arbitration. That's just the reference to it in our rules. It's mandated in our representation agreements, as I mentioned, and this was talked about yesterday. It's recognised by FIFA as a national dispute resolution chamber. It is our sole mechanism for resolving disputes, and we will see a number of disputes go to Rule K in England. That can be agent to agent, agent to player, agent to club. As our team, we don't get involved in them. That becomes a separate process. But yeah, that option is there. There is a cost still, but it hopefully is minimal compared to some other routes you can go down. It can be opted out of, obviously, for international disputes where people can choose another body to go to. And just important to clarify there that is separate to any misconduct. So there may be a dispute between agents, but if that crosses over into a misconduct matter, that would be dealt with by a regulatory commission. Payments to agents, this is an area where generally we mirror what FIFA set out in FFAR and the NFAR template. We do, though, strictly prohibit payments in respect of future transactions. It's an area where it's constantly evolving. We have regular challenges on what can and can't be paid, and it's probably an area where we end up with a bit more back and forth with clubs and agents on what is and isn't permitted, but we try and maintain a strong line in restricting anything relating to a future transaction. And again, that comes back to avoiding conflicts, generally ensuring the individuals are acting in the best interests of their client at that point in time. I don't know where in the world that is, but... Yeah, I think he needs to log in. Thank you. Thanks, guys. And yeah, to end on the payments element, again, to monitor compliance and ensure transparency, we require all proof of payments to be uploaded to our agents portal, which are again reviewed by our agents team, ensure the correct amounts are being paid, ensure it's going to the correct person. We did used to operate our own clearinghouse in England, so I guess some sympathies with FIFA in operating the clearinghouse there. It's an incredibly difficult task, and yeah, we eventually chose the option of a declaration process rather than handling the flow of funds. At the moment, we think that works quite well, but again, we do have some compliance issues where we're having to chase clubs and chase agents to ensure they're doing this timely and properly. I've been asked a few times about monitoring compliance and how we do it. One of the key parts of that is reviewing transactions, so reviewing a registration submission. Again, Hayes and Toad were fortunate to have the resource to be able to do this in our team, but we would review every single player registration event in England, and that would include reviewing the agents element of it. So we have what's called an AF1 form, and it is my initials, but it's not because of my initials, it's just Agents Form 1, and that needs to be completed for every single transaction involving an agent in England. So once a player contract and transfer agreement is submitted to us, another mandatory document is that document is submitted, as well as any relevant representation agreements. So as part of that process, we would check whether the agents are registered with the FA. We would review the rep agreements, make sure they're valid, and make sure there's no clauses in there which would cause an issue for us. And important part to that is we would only register the player with the club once we have reviewed and approved all those agents' elements of the paperwork. So it forces everyone's hand to some extent to comply, because there's everyone in the end of the day wants to make sure the player's playing on a Saturday or during the week. And yeah, that's where we do have a bit of back and forth with clubs and agents to make sure we get to that stage, because we certainly don't want to be stopping any players playing football either. That's the last thing we would want to do, but we also want to make sure we can ensure everyone's complying with the regulations. And again, going back to one of the initial points, it's a level playing field. Everyone has to go through this process, whether it's a Premier League transaction or a Northern Premier League transaction. They all have to do it. As part of that, and perhaps not initially as that process, we would review media reports, social media, and other intelligence we have. That could be reports from football agents, to basically ensure what's being presented to us is accurate. A common theme we have at the moment in England is people on social media celebrating the success of a player transfer or player registration, saying I represented X guy in X deal, and they're not on our paperwork, they're not listed on our paperwork. So that's something we regularly explore. We would contact clubs and we would contact individuals if we see someone as stating they've been involved in a transfer when the paperwork we've seen doesn't include that. Following on from that is sanctions and investigations. So we rely on that transaction review process. We rely on intelligence from elsewhere, media reports, social media, as I've said. A big thing we rely on is reporting, and that's, I guess, a message to agents. And that, I know, again, is maybe dealt with slightly differently in England, but agents reporting matters to us really helps. It does make a difference, because we always see a lot of whispers, oh, so-and-so's done X or so-and-so's done Y, but without getting real documentary evidence and real testimonies from individuals involved, it's very difficult to progress a regulatory case against an individual, against a club. So generally, warnings are issued or charged. All our cases, if it goes to charge, are heard by an independent commission, and you'll see all of our sanctions are published on our website. They range from small fines and small suspensions to more lengthy ones. One thing we're working on at the moment is a set of sanction guidelines. I think we've felt perhaps the sanctions don't mirror the offence at times, so we want to move towards something a bit more structured, but that's again a big piece of work, and that would be a big step forward for us. and that's what we'd like to get to. So some of the common issues we've seen are concealing or misrepresenting the reality of the transaction. That could include, and we moved from a fairly straightforward registration process under intermediaries to a full-blown licensing system, where people perhaps are not the genuine player's agent on the paperwork, and someone else is acting in the background, so shadowing, we call it. Entering into agreements with minors without proper FA authorization. And a lot of the times there's no malice intended here. This is an administrative thing, but we talked about the importance of the regulation of protection of minors in England. So we have a lot of sanctions in relation to protection of minors. And again, it may just be that they haven't filed a document in the right way, but we do take it seriously. And performing services without a valid representation contract. So going back to that transaction review process, if we received a set of registration paperwork and an agent was named there, but there was no valid representation agreement in place, that would be something we'd pick up on there. This was mentioned briefly yesterday by Danny. FIFA is reporting of unlicensed agents. So if we get any intel on unlicensed agents acting in England, we will pass that information to FIFA, and they will be prohibited from sitting the exam. It's something we work closely with on FIFA, so we're always happy to provide that information because it's unlicensed agents is a big issue, and it's great that FIFA have the ability to sort of stop that at source, because it's difficult for us as a governing body to take any action against someone who isn't part of your regulations, isn't a participant. Sorry, I had to include Tony Yeboah on the slides, who's my favourite player from one of my teams. Publications, declarations and transparency. So I talked about that figure of agents' fees paid at the start of the presentation. That all comes as part of an annual publication process, which in FIFA mandate. I believe we were the first people to do it, first association to do it this year round. And that's a big piece of work where we have to work closely with our clubs to ensure that data is accurate. We also require an annual return, which needs to be submitted from an agent to all of their clients, basically telling every bit of money that's been earned in relation to that client over the reporting period. Conflicts of interest. So we do allow dual representation in England, but what we do also have is a requirement to declare any other conflicts of interest. So this could be, for example, the agent of the player is also the agent of the coach at the club, for example, or there's some sort of other relationship there. And a requirement to lodge any other agreements with the FA. So not just representation agreements need to be lodged with us. If there's anything between an agent and a player, separate to their representation agreement, again, in the interest of transparency, that needs to be lodged with the FA. That's not to say we would say you can't do that. It just needs to be declared to us. So yeah, that is a whistle-stop tour of regulation of football agents in England. I guess some key takeaways, we talked about member associations a lot yesterday, and I know it's difficult for us in England to sort of maybe share our experiences. Like I say, it's a different resourcing, and we have different level of attention perhaps on the market. Stakeholder consultation is key, considering the uniqueness of the league and the nation you're working in, protecting minors. I won't apologise again for saying that. Effective investigation and sanctions, so making sure we do investigate, and if we get there, we sanction. Promoting transparency and creating this framework, so whether that's standard documents, whether that's being on the end of a phone or email, to be able to support all participants. For agents, open communication and collaboration with stakeholders. So for us, and this comes with a second point as well, engage with a member association. The more feedback we can get at an earlier time about what in our regulations is and isn't working, we love hearing that feedback, because we're not out there in the field. We're on one side of it, but we need to hear people's experiences, which is why it's so valuable being here over these couple of days take advantage of guidance and support. So that's user standard documents, that's we have a set of guidance notes. FIFA have a myriad of support and documents out there to support people. Reporting is a big issue. So I mentioned it there. If you can report anything, sometimes it won't go anywhere, which I know can be frustrating, but being able to report breaches is important. And I guess the final message there is user compliance as a competitive advantage. It should be a selling point in this industry that you're aware of rules and regulations, you're compliant, and you're doing your job properly and effectively. So thank you very much. I'm not sure how long that took, but thank you very much everyone for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Andy? Okay, we have a question from Daniel.
Hello, Andy. Just to, well, thank you for that presentation. I just wanted also I appreciate your support that you are currently dealing with these matters and reporting to us as much as you can. From a practical standpoint, and for the people that are sitting in this room, I would like you to explain the best way you can about how you, and this can be taken as an example for anyone that wants to report any unlicensed activity, how is the process of the moment you receive any indication of a reporting for unlicensed activity, how your relationship is with the entities you have to engage with, being with clubs or with the players, if you inquire the players, or with any of the other associations. How easy is it for you to get that kind of collaboration? And third part, when the moment that you address this to FIFA, how do you deal with, for example, if you submit to us a report about unlicensed activity and we submit a decision on that individual, how do you take that information into your own system? Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a relatively, thank you for the question. We have a relatively standard process when we become aware of an unlicensed individual acting. We would write to all relevant individuals in the case, so that would be the club. We would most certainly write to the player as well, if it was revolving around representation of the player. And we would then take any feedback we get on those before making a decision and passing to FIFA. So yeah, we don't generally get feedback. Obviously, sometimes the response, you may be dubious about what you receive in a response. And again, if that is something incredibly serious, we would push that further, and we may do face-to-face interviews, or we may take that further. But it would initially be a written correspondence between the FA and the participants. And as for once if that's passed to FIFA and a decision is passed, we would use our football agents platform in England to monitor that.
Bonjour. Nous tenons à vous féliciter pour votre excellent exposé. Bon, moi, je vous reviens en tant qu'agent de la Fédération anglaise de football. C'est bon?
Sorry, I'm not getting any translation.
Détenant aussi une autorisation de représentation des mineurs. Je voudrais savoir, pour le modèle type dont vous parliez, par rapport au mandat de représentation, si vous en disposiez, ou bien il y a un modèle type, et comment est-ce qu'on devrait faire pour pouvoir en bénéficier. Aussi, je voudrais savoir aussi, parce que des fois, il y a des intermédiaires qui sont en Angleterre, qui n'ont pas la licence, qui nous approchent par rapport à des internationaux qui sont sous contrat avec nous. Je voudrais savoir exactement qu'est-ce que le règlement en dit, vu qu'ils n'ont pas la licence, pour venir nous approcher et essayer de proposer nos joueurs au club.
Thank you very much for the question. I think I got the translation at the end there. First point regarding representation agreements. So yes, that is our standard form. We wouldn't recognise a mandate or anything like that. We would always require it contains our mandatory terms. It's on our standard form. These are all publicly available, so they can be used. They're obviously tailored for England, but they can be used in other territories if you wanted to amend for best practice. But yeah, we wouldn't recognise any other form of agreement lodged with us. So we have had that a few times, but yeah, it would have to be on our standard form. Obviously, for an international transaction, so an incoming international transaction, providing it meets FIFA's requirements, we would accept that. But again, that would be the minimum standard. But once a player becomes registered in England and sign anything new in England, then it would have to be on our standard form. Regarding being contacted by unlicensed individuals from England, as I said, other than reporting to FIFA, there's not much action we can take there. I've mentioned about that you're aware, obviously, you have one yourself of our digital ID. I've mentioned our list on our website. That would be the only sort of ways we have of checking. You're also welcome to contact our team. They deal with queries of this nature. But yeah, that would be our answers to that. I hope I hope the translation came through okay.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Can we just jam our hands together? Well, such a wonderful presentation. I'm very glad that you mentioned in your presentation how the English FA uses the photo ID on the digital card for identification. I hope FIFA will borrow a leaf from you and adopt same. Thank you so much. Let's just jam our hands together. Thank you. Quickly, in the next succession, we'll be having another keynote address from our partners in Mission 89. Dr. May will be speaking to us on the shared responsibility, defining accountability, and a fight against exploitation and human trafficking in football. So if your hands are not too busy, just jam them together once again as we welcome Dr. May Ikiora Amagbo, Director of Mission 89 Africa, for our presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is just taken from our conversation yesterday, and I think some of the questions I was asked during my Q&A basically leads up to this topic today, which is shared responsibility. Some of the questions I got yesterday was question and comment, really, about the fact that we need to focus more on MAs, member associations, and their own responsibility to ensuring that, they fulfill their own part in ensuring that athletes are not trafficked or exploited. And I agree with you that we need to get the federations involved, but at the same time, it is, and I've seen that being echoed by so many people who have presented today, talking about the fact that no one stakeholder can solve the problem of safeguarding or exploitation or abuse in, around, and through sports. So whilst I agree with you definitely that the MAs should take responsibility, we believe that it is indeed a shared responsibility, and that is the only way we can make any difference. yesterday, I mean, whenever we talk about trafficking, for instance, in sports or through sports or around sports, and we have to lay a blame on someone, we ask ourselves, who is to be blamed for all this? Who should we hold accountable for this? The easiest culprit is the criminal, is a trafficker, and that is legally accurate. But what is strategically essential is every institution that enables, ignores, or even fails to prevent it. Conversations I've had with some of you in this room today, or yesterday and today, has been finding real solutions to these problems. I found out about some of the great work that some of you are doing here today, and we've been discussing ways to collaborate to actually make a difference. So that when we leave conferences like this, it's not just about talks, but it's also about how we walk our talk. And so it requires not just us as Mission 89, it requires everyone else here, because even there are some agents here who also have NGOs that they run to ensure that they get communities involved and they build capacity and raise awareness of some of this so that people within their communities don't fall prey to some of the forms of exploitation that we've discussed here today. We, in Mission 89, in collaboration with a lot of academics and great sponsors, published a report, which we call the Global Thematic Report. We had 116 experts respond across Africa, Europe, and North America. These are numbers and statistics about why it is important for us to really, really define this problem. I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues who was also part of this, drafting this report, and he was talking about moving away from just talking about abuse and really defining what exploitation is, because sometimes whilst we want to make sure we don't cross the line of exploitation, we forget that we are actually oftentimes discussing abuse as opposed to really talking about exploitation, which can go beyond abuse. We're looking for people in chains, we're looking for someone that has been beaten down, but what we are not looking at is the person who has been economically exploited, the person who, but instead we're looking for someone who has been labor exploited. And I don't want to get into the technical terms of all of this, but that definition is important for when lawyers are trying to pin down a criminal for something they've done wrong. Without those technicalities clarified, we're just going around in circles. We can talk about it in this room, but what result does it generate? That is where the technicalities become really important, which is what makes research like this important. And that at the end of the day, we're able to get some level of law, international law, national or policies that comes out of this, basically solidifies any point or any case that we want to make in protecting athletes. 78.4 people, respondents said that trafficking through sport is a significant problem. 48.2 say there are no effective regulations currently in place in sport. 84.4 name abuse as a position of vulnerability as a primary means used by traffickers. And I'm sure you can read the rest, but none of the respondents could cite any anti-trafficking legislation exclusive for sports in their territory. These are some of the fights, some of the advocacy that we push for in Mission 89. Just having an intention is not enough. Some of us, yesterday, some agents talked about the things that they also do. And I've heard a lot of conversations here today about, how we have been reactive to some of this exploitation. But what we don't see is the fragmented responsibility. And I think we've also, in some of the presentation, it's been pointed out, one way or the other,